If you've been following me over my years on the Bassmaster Elite Series, you know I love to jerkbait fish. So jerkbait fishing is kind of one of those things, I'm gonna say it's kind of got a bad cliche or pigeonholed into a one category. A lot of people think it's a pre-spawn cold water bait. Well, if you watched Lake Fork a couple years ago, it was a post-spawn shad spawn tournament, and I actually caught over 100 pounds on a Yo-Zuri jerkbait. So jerkbaits, I think they get a bad stigma of only being that cold water bait, but in my mind, a jerkbait is a great bait anytime fish are feeding on shad, which anybody that knows anything about bass, they feed on shad pretty much 12 months of the year. So I always keep a jerkbait tied on. You may vary your retrieves or how you fish them or where, but there's always a bait I throw. In the colder months, you definitely have to go with a slower retrieve. I will give it more pauses, more deliberate jerks, and let it sit there. And then as the water warms, you can fish it a lot faster. I know a lot of the hot weather tournaments or even post-spawn, late spring, I fish my jerkbait essentially with no pauses. I never stop it. It's just a constant jerking retrieve, pretty aggressive. And you just vary that as you go to kind of see what's working that day. I wish there was a handbook to tell you how to twitch your jerkbait, but it takes a lot of trial and error and experience on the water to just throw it and vary it every couple casts until you kind of put together that daily pattern that could change every day. So a jerkbait's a great bait to throw 12 months of the year. If fish are eating shad, they'll eat a jerkbait. Now my favorite 3 places to throw a jerkbait all kind of vary greatly. My very favorite place is actually up shallow in like a shad spawn. When the shad are spawning or the herons in different parts of the country, the fish are feeding like crazy, and a jerkbait is a real effective way to catch those fish. I like to throw it wherever you see the shad spawning, essentially, whether it's up on some rocks, up on top of a point, maybe even the grass line. When you see those active shad spawning in the spring, a jerkbait can be one of the quickest and most effective ways to catch them. Outside of that shallow shad spawn, you can't go wrong with a jerkbait for suspended fish. If I'm in colder water, especially when you're seeing fish on your front looking sonar, your active target, jerkbait is always a go-to bait to get those fish to bite. A lot of times it takes a slower retrieve to get them to bite, more pauses, something like that, but it's always an effective bait to catch it. And also, one more place I love to throw a jerkbait, kind of non-traditional style, is I love to throw a jerkbait around bridges. No matter where you go in the country, bridges have fish on them. And the nature of fish on bridges is they like to suspend. When they suspend, whether it's on the riprap points, the poles, wherever they're suspending on that bridge, they generally are susceptible to jerkbaits. A jerkbait's a great way to catch them when they're suspended in that 4 to 6 foot on poles. And you can fish it right by to get those kind of tough and heavily pressured fish to bite. The great thing about the Yo-Zuri jerkbaits is we have actually 2 models. We have the 110 and then the 110 deep. And the way I decide which bait to throw is obviously how deep I think the fish are at, whether they're suspended or down on the bottom. And the cool thing about these 2 jerkbaits is they have a pretty broad array of depths that they dive, and you can vary that even with lighter line. The traditional jerkbait, is that mid-range typical jerkbait fishing, the 110 for, 4 to 6 foot of water. And if you go up to the deep and really get your line size down smaller, 8 or 10 pound tests, you can get that bait really down there to get those fish suspended a little bit deeper, trickier to catch. So when you're throwing a jerkbait, just the nature of it, you gotta keep jerking. It's a pretty exhausting bait, so the right setup makes a big difference on how effectively you can fish that jerkbait. I like a shorter rod. I like a 6'11", anything from a 6'8" to a 6'11". I'm a taller guy, so I like a 6'11", but I like to be able to jerk the bait down. Because if you can't jerk down, you hit the side of the boat or the water, it makes it kind of tough. So a 6'8" to 6'10", and I like a light reel. I use a Revo MGX Extreme. It's a really light reel. It's a kind of exhausting type of fishing. So that's why I like the smaller reel. Line size, you can vary your line size a lot with a jerkbait. I would say 12-pound test is kind of my go-to line size, but you can go up to 14 if you don't want to go quite so deep, or down to 8 or 10 if you want to get down a little bit deeper. A lot of times in fall fishing, especially on current driven systems, which that's what this is. There's a lot of current here. We're up towards the dam, not the tail race, but on the upper end. The current positions the fish, and you've kind of got to, I like to throw a jerkbait a lot in this type of water, but you kind of got to figure out, do you think they're on the flatter stuff with the current coming over it, or more the bluff like channel swing banks? And that's the 2 type situations I like to look for. And then once you put a pattern together, you can kind of target that type of water, whether it's steep banks or really flat banks or flat points that come out. If the water's more stained on the more cloudy side, I go with less translucent colors, like a white or a pearl, something that the light doesn't come through quite as much. And then as the water clears, I like more of a real natural shad pattern, like a blueback with the clear sides or something like that. Just, you really want to get less translucent colors, the dirtier the water is the way to make it simple. And every color imitates shad, because that's what a jerkbait's doing. It's imitating shad. In the fall and winter, a shad die off or something like that. When it gets really cold, the shad they get real lethargic, and a lot of them actually die if it gets cold enough. And the jerkbait is the perfect imitation of that type of forage. Visit your local or online tackle stores to get you some 3DB 110 and 110 deep jerkbaits.